Now in this part, we are going to talk about tissue fluid and how that becomes lymph, and then we are going to talk about the different lymphatic organs. So what is tissue fluid? Tissue fluid is the interstitial fluid, which means the fluid in between cells. After that fluid performs its function, it is going to gather, cellular debris, maybe pathogens, different waste products from the cell. Now, all of that is going to will enter into the lymphatic capillary and now change its name from tissue fluid to lymph, which means that the amount of lymph that is formed will obviously depend on the amount of tissue fluid that is formed. So just a quick review on how we make tissue fluid. Remember this image from chapter 15, where you have the blood flowing through the capillary from the arterial end towards the venous end. These are your cells with the interstitial spaces, and that is the lymphatic capillary. Remember that at the arteriolar end, that favored filtration into the interstitial space, while on the venous end, that favored reabsorption back into the capillary. But the amount of fluid filtered is more than the amount of fluid that is being reabsorbed. And that remaining, that difference becomes your interstitial fluid or your tissue fluid. So the resulting tissue fluid basically has the same composition of plasma minus the plasma proteins. These plasma proteins are just too big and they cannot pass through the capillary slits or those little holes in the capillaries, and that's why they remain inside of the capillaries. So again, your tissue fluid is the same as plasma, same composition of plasma minus those large plasma proteins. It has water, it has lots of nutrients, it's got gases, and it has hormones in order to affect the different cells. The plasma proteins that remain here behind inside of the capillary maintains that osmotic pressure in order to help in the reabsorption that occurs on the venous end. So again, your tissue fluid is basically blood plasma minus the plasma proteins. Now, how does lymph flow? The lymphatic capillaries, generally speaking, have a very low hydrostatic pressure, kind of like the venous circulation. So good lymphatic flow really needs a lot of help. Okay, and you'll see that a lot of this help really mimics the help needed on the venous end. So muscle activity, okay, so the contraction of your skeletal muscles are going to help squeeze the lymphatic vessels to move the lymph. The movement of the respiratory muscles as we inhale again and exhale, all of that change in negative and positive pressure helps in the movement of lymph. The smooth muscles that are found in the lymphatic vessels, those can also squeeze the lymphatic capillaries and lymphatic vessels and help in the movement of lymph in them. Lymphatic vessels have valves to prevent backflow, and the lymphatic flow is actually highest during physical exercise. So you'll see that a lot of this kind of parallels a lot of things that we already talked about when we discussed the venous circulation. Now, the lymphatic organs that we have are our lymph nodes, the thymus gland, and the spleen. So these are the bigger organs, and we are going to touch upon each of one kind of like individually. We also have scattered lymphatic tissue throughout our different systems, and those are known as MALT, or mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Those, again, are lymphatic tissue that are scattered. They don't have any capsules or anything. They're scattered within the digestive, respiratory, urinary, and reproductive tracts. And what all of these tracts have in common is that they do open up to the outside world. And they are lined with mucous membranes, hence the name mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. So, for example, the tonsils, the appendix, Peyer's patches, which are little collections or aggregations of lymphatic tissue found in the ileum, which is the distal part of the small intestine. So again, because These tracts open up to the outside world. You want to try to trap as many pathogens trying to get in as possible. So you'll find the tonsils, for example, at the beginning of the oral cavity, or in the back, all the way in the back, and can collect germs that are trying to get in either through the digestive system or the respiratory system. Appendix and Peyer's patches are found within the digestive system. So again, try to trap different pathogens trying to get in our body through food. So we'll take a look at what a lymph node looks like. These are scattered throughout the body. They're very, P-shaped structures. They're very small. And that you would find that it has lymphatic vessels bringing in lymph. That would be your afferent lymphatic vessel. The lymph circulates here within, on the inside of the lymph node to get filtered, and then it exits through the afferent lymphatic vessel. This is where you have the hilum of the lymph node. The hilum of any organ is just an area where things either enter or exit. So you'll find here the afferent lymphatic vessel. You can find the blood vessels. On the inside of the lymph node, there's a cortex on the outside, and that cortex had lots of germinal centers that are making B lymphocytes. The medulla of the lymph node, so the innermost part of the lymph node, that has lots of macrophages and T lymphocytes. Whether the T or B lymphocytes, those help in attacking any viruses or bacteria or parasites that is found in lymph. While the macrophages are going to eat up, so they are phagocytic cells, they are going to engulf and destroy any foreign substances trying to enter the body. They are going to destroy damaged cells or cellular debris that was filtered from that, from the interstitial tissue. Now, your lymph nodes, again, are scattered throughout the whole body with one exception, and that is the CNS. Excuse me. So the central nervous system does not have lymph nodes. Major location of lymph nodes, you'll find them in the cervical area. These are the ones that we can palpate, we can feel them if they are enlarged or if there's an infection. The axillary lymph nodes in the armpit, there are the inguinal lymph nodes at the junction between the lower limbs and the trunk. There is the supratrochlear lymph nodes, and those are found at the elbows. So these are the ones that are easy to feel, but there are deeper ones like the pelvic lymph nodes, the abdominal cavity lymph nodes, or the lymph nodes in the thoracic cavity. These are more deep and harder to palpate. Now the thymus, we talked very briefly about the thymus in the endocrine system. So we'll go into a little bit more detail. The thymus is a gland that is found in the mediastinal area. It has two lobes, and it kind of looks like the thyroid gland, but again, remember the thyroid gland is totally endocrine, not involved within the lymphatic system. It's found in the neck, while the thymus gland is found in the chest. Thymus gland has lots of lobules. These lobules have lymphocytes. And these lymphocytes are derived from all of those progenitor stem cells that are found in the red bone marrow. These cells tend to be inactive at first, and these are known as thymocytes, but they become activated and become mature T lymphocytes with the help of thymosin hormone. So we will find that your T lymphocytes, they kind of start off in the red bone marrow, but then they have to mature and pretty much grow up and become activated in the thymus gland. Now you'll see that the thymus gland is the largest and the most active during infancy and early childhood. So you see here, that's the size of the thymus in a fetus in comparison to the surrounding organs. Once we hit puberty, the thymus gland starts to shrink. It's very small in adulthood. In elderly, pretty much that thymus gland has been replaced with adipose tissue and connective tissue. And that's why, again, getting all of our shots in childhood, in early infancy and childhood is very important because that's how, the thymus gland is there and it is able to produce all of these T lymphocytes and provide lifelong immunity. While as we age, again, we become more prone to infections because we have lost the protection of the thymus gland. And you'll find that a lot of these shots that we take as adults, like the flu shot, for example, something that we have to take on an annual basis because, again, we kind of lost, that function of the thymus gland. Now for the spleen is the largest lymphatic organ. It's found in the upper left portion, right underneath the diaphragm. Structure-wise, it looks like a large lymph node, obviously a very large one. Okay, and it is a very vascular organ. It has lots and lots of blood in it. Okay, it has these little lakes of venous fluid that is known as venous sinuses, and that's why the spleen is considered a blood reservoir. So the function of the spleen is not to filter lymph. The spleen is going to filter blood. Okay, so its function mimics the function of the lymph nodes, but on a much bigger scale, and again on blood where the lymph nodes are going to filter lymph. The spleen, again, as I mentioned, is a very vascular organ, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. So it is considered a blood reservoir. So if somebody gets into maybe an accident and they lose a lot of blood, the spleen does have the ability to squeeze itself through the contraction of all of its smooth muscles and to squeeze all of that blood back into the circulation, a process known as autotransfusion, where the person is pretty much transfusing blood into themselves. So again, autotransfusion. But on the bad side would be that if, due to that accident, again, if there's a ruptured spleen or a fracture of those false ribs in the back, that could very easily, lead to a tear into the spleen. A splenic rupture, a splenic tear is a very bloody one because, again, of it being highly vascular. The spleen has two different tissue types: white pulp, that is made out of lymphocytes or white blood cells, hence the name white pulp, and then red pulp that also has lymphocytes and macrophages, but it has lots of red blood cells, and that's where the red discoloration comes from. Now we'll talk about the defenses against infections in its own portion.